I'm recording now. There we go. Nikki, can you hear?
Finally.
There we go. Perfect.
Good.
All right. There we go. Okay.
So I'm not quite used to StreamYard, but I'm assuming that Nikki is. So any.
No, this is the first. I've seen Benjamin use it, but I've never gotten to participate in it.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, then we're both learning something new today. That's never a bad
Absolutely.
thing.
There we go.
Well, Nikki, what is your topic going to be on this morning?
So Benjamin and I did two topics. So the first one that I'll present is perfect buoyancy. Unless you have any other. Okay.
No. So from the perfect buoyancy program, what section is it, or what little slice of the pie are you going to be presenting?
Yes. So the perfect buoyancy program, and then I'm going to focus on section 3, that perfect buoyancy topic.
Okay. So Benjamin, whenever someone is doing a presentation, I always make sure that I have that pulled up, just the instructor view, just to keep myself on topic, but also to just kind of verify that they are completely understanding where to get that information from. So let me just log into my SSI.
Sure.
Because a lot of the times they will state the objective and the main points verbatim. And so then that saves me from having to write them down. It's fine if they don't. But it just kind of keeps me just right there step by step with them.
No problem. I'm opening that now. There we go. Got it open. And what section were you doing, Nick?
3.
And you're doing the entire section?
Yes. So when Benjamin and I looked at it and talked about it this morning, he gave me one piece of it last night. And then when I pulled up the pegs this morning, I was like, I think this is really going to be better to just talk about section 3 because there's more to the pegs to be able to discuss.
Right. So some topics it's easy just to take one little portion out of that section. Other ones, it is very difficult, especially if information that you are using was just presented in the previous section. Right. So I don't have any problems with you doing it that way at all. Okay. So, Benjamin, as you know, so when we click on section 3, everyone has access to the objectives. That is easy. And so I always teach my candidates, you don't have to make up your own objective. All you have to do is open your material and use the ones that SSI gives you and just make sure that it's measurable. Now, different instructors have a different opinion on measurable. In SSI, it says, after completing this section, you will be able to. My opinion is if SSI feels that statement makes it measurable, who am I to second guess or question SSI? Other people say, no, I need to know what I'm going to be learning, when I'm going to be learning it, and be more specific about not only when will I be learning it, but using it. So that is something that you are going to have to ponder and decide yourself on what you feel makes it measurable. Then in the pro view of it, I can see all of the main points, or not even in the pro view, everybody can just see the main points. Typically, if it's not the pro view, I tell people because sometimes students don't have access to that pro view yet. And in that case, if you say, look for anything in bold, and that is more than likely your main points. But something that comes so easy to us doesn't necessarily come easy to other people. And so that's why I sent you just in an email yesterday, kind of how I break down preparing and making your very first presentation ever, because I've just seen some people struggle with this, and I feel for them. I get that it's not easy for everyone, as well as the nerves. Some people are very, very intimidated by speaking to other people, even if it's just one-on-one. The other thing is that we have to discuss, Benjamin, is who are the students? Because you typically want to be the evaluator, but both of us are the evaluator. So we both the students. You as the assistant instructor trainer need to have a game plan on that, because Nikki is at a loss if she doesn't have any students, because then she loses points on involving the entire class, as well as assessing their knowledge.
Sure.
Sometimes I will also answer a question incorrectly, but just slightly, to see how they can react to that. Because in a real life scenario, their students are going to give them inaccurate information, occasionally. Sometimes I'll say, I don't know. We both know the answers, right? But sometimes I'll say, I don't know, just to see how they'll handle that. And I never answer the question so thoroughly that takes away the information that they were going to give me. So we just kind of have to learn how to best train them to do presentations, but also be uplifting to them and help them to, at this stage of the games, well, not for Nikki, but when you're first teaching an assistant instructor, how to best help them achieve their goals and feel good about their successes. So that's just a few little tips on how I do it. Like you said, you've been doing presentations for quite a while. I'm not sure if you've had much experience teaching people how to do presentations. I don't know if you require your dive guide candidates to do presentations, academic presentations.
I do. I started getting them on the road from classes before they even hit dive guide. I've got a class tonight with a younger student that's doing altitude and nitrox with me, and so I require him to pick a subject and start talking to him about how to do the presentations. And my litmus bar for him is very, very low, but that it's more about getting in the understanding, ensuring he has the understanding of what he's talking about, and explaining it out in his own way. But as we get closer and closer to dive guide, I require higher and higher levels of success through that process, and then even in the dive guide to get their higher levels. And then once they are dive guides, then I ask them to start working at the next level for assistant instructor, with the idea that if you plan on going on, we need to. This is how it works, and this is what it looks like, and I need to see better. And so, and go through this process. And then and Nikki will tell you that I'll pull them, but while my students are dressing if they're teaching open water subjects, while the students are dressing, I'll pull them aside and I'll give them my list of, okay, here's what I noticed. Here's the no-go zones. Here's the, here's what I need to see from you, and here's what I want better. And here's what you did good. Nikki, I tell you, I really work hard to make all my classes very positive.
Yeah. Well, and do you use the academic teaching evaluation form?
Okay. I do, absolutely.
Okay. So you're very familiar with it. Very good. Mm-hmm. Very good.
Yeah. So not only does he use it, but he also usually provides it to the dive guide candidates that he's working with, so that they can see it and understand the evaluation process as well.
Very good. Okay, well, then I'll hand it over to our assistant instructor trainer and let him take the reins.
All right, I'm just going to move a few things around here, so I've got everything that I can see at the same place. as well.
I think you're the opposite of me with technology. I'm good to just get one device working, let alone multiples.
I spend a lot of time in technology, and my little nerd station is reasonably impressive. I have 4 screens going simultaneously, so that I'm able to work. But yeah,
it helps so that we both have jobs, though, that we're on the computer constantly, right? So Benjamin's
does.
on there a lot to interfacing with his different softwares and things that he logs into to help different car dealers and things. And I'm on the computer constantly for my job too. So, I mean, I have a second screen, but I can't plug it into my laptop. This laptop, anyways. But
Yeah.
it's nice to have multiple to pull stuff across.
Yeah.
I'll send you a picture of my nerd station. I've got a bunch. I've got a pro mic I'm here that and then I've got my camera between the 2 screens, but I've got a screen, a screen, a screen, and a screen. So it makes it nice to be able to have everything I need and in front of me. Fun story. Years ago, I've been doing 3 to 4 screens for a while, and I was with another company that I didn't realize they had they had a training once a month you had to be a part of, and then they had 2 meetings once a month 2 meetings a month that you had to be a part of as well. And a lot of the trainings had nothing to do with me, and I had zero interest. And a lot of the meetings had nothing to do with me, and I had zero interest. So what I would do is I just turn my volume down, and I'd move the meeting over to my right screen, and I'd work on the screens in front of me and do stuff because they were an hour long and they were useless. And I just turned it down to real low to make sure that if they did need me for some reason, I could chime in. But I kept the screen 100%. I kept the volume on. I just turned the volume down with my speakers, and I'd been doing that for about a year. And the VP said, "Hey, you work at a very high level, Benjamin, but what's more impressive is the guys that work at high levels have the worst attendance ratios and worst screen time from our meetings. You have 100%." And I'm like, "Well, I do good." They didn't realize I was turning them down and throwing them off to the side while I did stuff. Everybody else would, because they could tell if you minimize the screen, and they could tell if you muted it. So I would never mute my screen, and I would never minimize it. I just kept it on a screen so I could kind of glance at it once in a while. So kind of funny. Yeah. All right. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the presentation on your perfect buoyancy. And we'll obviously both be grading you at this point, but we'll to give you a better opportunity for class. You both Janine and myself are targets of opportunity for class, for questions, and for participation, so to make your life a little bit easier. So you have more than just a one-on-one student, and making sure you're given that opportunity for full presentation. Does that sound good?
No, well, so I apologize. Apparently our internet is cutting out for one or the other of us this morning. So I'm assuming that both you and Janine are acting as students then?
Correct. So you'll be able to ask questions of both of us, or ask for participation in whatever manner that you so choose from both of us. But I'll be grading you.
And if the internet cuts out, Nikki, and you can't hear our reply or anything like that, just kind of raise your hand. Let us know that you couldn't hear our reply, but you're welcome to continue with your presentation. Don't let the fact that we're on Zoom hinder you at all. And after this first one, if you don't feel like that this is doable, we can easily do, quick 30-minute presentation when I'm there or anytime. Don't let any of this stress you out at all.
Well, hopefully we can get it to work.
Should be fine. Cool. All right. Whenever you're ready.
Yep. Ready? We'll share my screen then, hopefully, if I can figure out how to do so. Guess we should have troubleshooted some of this, Benjamin, because
should we have a presenter?
That's what my problem with StreamYard is. I couldn't figure out how to share the screen, and finally I figured it out. But
should we present, and then you can choose either share screen, share slides. I usually use share screen, and then it'll give you a choice between window, entire screen, or Google Chrome.
Yeah, understood. But it wanted me to change the system's preferences, so I'm assuming then that you can see perfect buoyancy.
There we go.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. Let's zoom out just slightly on the presentation. For today, we're going to continue our perfect buoyancy discussion, and we're going to focus on section 3, the perfect buoyancy control. And we have 3 objectives for this lesson. 1, we're going to describe the proper adjustment procedures to streamline our equipment. 2, we're going to list the proper procedures for buoyancy control. And then 3, we're going to identify problems that we have with our, and correct any buoyancy problems that we have. So those are our objectives. So the value to us is that as we're diving, the ability to be able to control our buoyancy is going to give us a better abilities to be able to get closer to fish or coral or whatever it is that we're looking at. And we're going to be able to protect the environment that we're diving in, as well as not, bump into divers and things around us. So diving techniques. I think proper diving starts with visualizing our dive. A lot of times we end up with a dive plan, right? We've got on a boat, we're standing on the shore, somebody's given us a dive briefing and given us what our dive is going to look like from their point of view. As we're putting our gear together, if we can take that dive briefing and we can visualize how we're carrying out our dive, that's going to help us be able to maintain our buoyancy as we're diving. As we're setting up our gear, we want to make sure that we're considering where we're diving. So whether that be saltwater, freshwater, we want to take into account the weighting that we have due to that, what thickness of wetsuit we're wearing and things, as well as our cylinder size, material, and our air consumption. All of those things are going to play into our perfect buoyancy. Then we want to get to a point where we're only carrying as much weight as we absolutely need. So, Jean or Benjamin, what are some ways that you've noticed or had experience with being able to determine our perfect weight, or how much weight we should add to our buoyancy compensators?
Well, in open water, they taught us how to do a buoyancy check on the surface. So that's usually what I do.
So what does that look like?
Well, so while I'm on the surface, I go ahead and hold a normal breath of air and let the air out of my BCD and just kind of see where I float. And if I'm floating at about eye level with a normal breath of air, and then whenever I completely exhale, I start to descend at a adequate speed, then I feel like I'm properly weighted.
Perfect. That's exactly right. So a lot of times, hopefully, like if we're out traveling or if we've taken a trip someplace with our dive shop and things, we have a number 1 dive that we can go out and we can do that check, right? A lot of times when I've gone to Cozumel, we're drift diving, but they have a shore dive that we can do that night 1 to make sure that we're properly weighted. So when we get on the boat, we're not trying to guess an occurrence and having somebody hand us extra weight or we hand weight up to the boat and things. Benjamin, what about you? Any additional thoughts with checking our weight?
Certainly. So checking our weight for me is utilizing past dive experience as well, because we don't always have that opportunity to jump off the boat and check something. So utilizing the My SSI dive app on a regular basis is definitely key to make making sure that each dive that I make notes about how much weight I used, how I felt, and adding notes about how I felt buoyancy wise, as well as thermal protection and everything through the process, and having a detailed log, because if I have accurate information in the past, then I'm able to create a better experience forward. You and I both know when we dove with Brittany, she changed how she dove that one time by adding a 3 mil shorty over top of her 5 mil full length, and wasn't properly weighted for that, and she hadn't made notes of that or how to do that, and I doubt she still has. But you and I use our dive log on a regular basis to be very accurate on that. So because we dive 3 mil, 7 mil, 5 mil, dry suit, and rash guard. So
Right. So in different conditions too, right? Like we could use that 3 mil wetsuit in the ocean versus in freshwater. We're going to have different weighting. So if we're making sure that we're taking the opportunity to log our dives and include that information about what our weighting system was, how much weight we were diving, how we felt, just like you said, it gives us a better opportunity to then in the future to look back and say, okay, what do I do this time? All right. So the last part of this diving techniques is to relax and to focus on our breathing. And we'll continue to talk about this, but our breathing has a big impact on the buoyancy that we have. Being able to take a big breath will help us to rise in the water column, and as we exhale, it will allow us to descend. So how we're breathing, if it's quick, short little breaths, it's probably going to cause us to rise in the water column, and we're going to have a harder time being able to find that perfect position that we want to be in as we're diving. Whereas if we're taking big, nice, relaxed breaths, and sometimes I know as I first started trying to figure out my buoyancy and things, I would count. So I would count into an inhale for, kind of hold my breath for a couple of seconds, give my body time to be able to use that air to adjust, and then I'm going to exhale. Once again, counting to that count of 4 so that as I'm breathing, I'm paying attention to what my body is doing and where it's at within the water column. Before I move on from this slide, any questions about diving techniques or visualizing our dive plan, checking our weights?
So you said that you hold your breath for a few seconds. How do you know how long it's safe to hold your breath?
It's a kind of a pattern of breathing, right? And I don't hold it long, so it's just a couple of seconds. Our body takes a little bit of time to be able to adjust within that water column, right? So if I take a breath in and I just inhale it, I'm going to start to rise in the water column. And as I continue to hold that breath, that can be problematic. So that's why I try to keep it to like a count of 2 or 3. I just want to be able to ascend, maybe go over that big coral head or something. I'm going to exhale as I come out, and then my body once again is going to adjust as I descend. Does that help?
Thank you. It helped a lot. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. So next slide, positive buoyancy on the surface. So this is where we're going to start to talk about our adjustment procedures and how we're going to control that buoyancy. So we're on the surface, we've either geared up on the shore and we've walked into the water, or we've stepped off that boat. The important part is that our buoyancy compensator acts as a life jacket. So if we're sitting on the surface, we want to make sure that it's fully inflated. That's going to keep our head above water, make sure that we're okay, that we're able to signal to the boat that we're okay, we're able to communicate with the other divers around us that we're okay, we're ready to descend, or we have some sort of problem and we need some help. So that's a key piece. We want to make sure that we're positively buoyant on the surface, and we can't overinflate our BCs. We can either use the power inflator, or if we are out of air at the end of our dive, we're going to push the button on the end of it, we're going to blow into it and make sure that we're positively inflated. And so the other important pieces to this is we're going to keep our keeping our BC inflated, and then keeping either a regulator or a snorkel in our mouths, right? So a lot of times on the ocean, Benjamin and I have had experiences too, diving in the lakes, that we end up with some really choppy water. Being able to breathe is pretty key, especially if our head's possibly, descending under the water, even though our BC is fully inflated and things. And as we're getting back up on that dive boat, or possibly as we're coming out on a rocky shore, that's going to help protect our teeth, making sure that we've got that in our mouth. So once again, key things, we're going to signal to our buddies we're okay, we're ready to descend, or we're okay, we're ready to get back on the boat, is part of what we're going to do on the surface. Benjamin, why do you think it would be important that we're maintaining that positive buoyancy on the surface?
Certainly for safety, to make sure that we're comfortable in our situation, so that we're not in as new divers. A lot of times when they start getting that face in the water in an uncontrolled descent, they start going into panic mode as well. So if you're in waves, that the water splashing in your face can definitely be a concern as well. So it's another safety concern as well. So making sure you have a good full BC with your face out of the water creates a safer and more comfortable diving situation.
Absolutely. So This slide doesn't mention it, but that's one other thing, right? We've got our mask on. We want to keep our masks on, especially if we've got a regulator in that way that we can still continue to see. And if we need to, we can let some air out of our BC, descend just a little bit, and then come back up to the surface if it so needs to. Any other questions about maintaining our positive buoyancy on the surface?
No.
All right, let's move on to our next slide. So this is where we're going to start to dial in that buoyancy underneath of the water. So once we're ready to descend, we're going to lift our inflator hose up over our head. We're going to push the deflate button and we're going to descend. We want to make sure that as we're descending that we're paying attention to our environment. Benjamin and I's favorite place to go dive is Yellowstone Lake. We have these really cool tower structures that we go find, right? But Yellowstone Lake doesn't always have very good visibility, and we try to hit them spot on to where they are. And if we're descending too quickly, we could potentially crash into those, and they're very fragile structures, so there would be some potential damage. So we're going to deflate our BC, and we're going to pay attention to our environment as we're descending. I find the easiest way to be able to understand what's going on in my environment is to get into proper dive position as quickly as I can. So instead of descending vertically, I'm going to try to get horizontal, make sure that my feet are in the frog position, and pay attention, watch out for those things that are around me, so that way it gives me a visual to be able to see where the bottom is as I'm coming up to it, and I can continue to adjust as I need to. So Janine, you talked about checking our weight at the surface, right? Taking
Yes.
that small breath, or exhaling that small breath down. How have you experienced being able to descend in the water column after you do that first buoyancy check?
Well, I do the exact same thing you do. As soon as I've started that descent, I get in the neutral diving position, because in that position, I can also, it helps me to slow down my descent a little bit, as well as be able to see, I can see my buddy, I can see the structure beneath me. And with my hands out front, I can also see my depth, so that I can follow the dive plan that the leaders have briefed us on prior to the dive.
Absolutely. So we're going back to that first slide, right? We're visualizing that dive plan, but now we're actually following through and carrying it out. We're making sure that we're following that dive plan. We're checking our depths constantly. So one of the key pieces to this slide is it says to add a small amount of air to control our descent, right? So Benjamin and I dive in a lot of cold water, and I noticed that as I start to descend at about 15 feet, I start pressing my air valve on my dry suit to be able to add just a little bit of air. At the same time, I also add a couple small puffs to my BC, because my dry suit isn't what's controlling my buoyancy, my BC is. So as we're monitoring how we're descending, and we're doing that flare if need to kind of slow us down, so we're controlling our descent as needed. So once again, there's a lot of situations where we're diving. Once again, experience like in Cozumel or Curacao, we're diving at a wall. We've gotten our dive briefing, our max depth is 60, 70 feet. In order to be able to get there, we're going to continue to adjust as we're descending, so that we're adding those small puffs of air, so we're not blowing past that deepest point in our dive plan. And then as we need to throughout the dive, we're just going to make small adjustments. So there's a lot of times as I'm guiding people, I'll notice that somebody seems like they're really heavy. Benjamin and I have started giving ourselves signs, right? So if we're really light, we'll do a few small lifts up, or if we're really heavy, we'll do some small lifts down. And as I'm guiding divers, I can see, hey, this person seems like they're really heavy. So I'll take my inflator hose, I'll point to the power inflator, and I'll say 2 puffs, 2 little puffs. As we do that, it's going to help us to be able to control that buoyancy and be able to maintain where we're at. Once again, we don't want to crash into the bottom. We don't want to stir up a bunch of sand, because that's going to ruin our visibility. And we want to protect the environment as much as we can. And then we're going to take a few moments. Benjamin and I, when we first started diving together, I think he noticed that I was a little bit more of a nervous diver, and so he would give me this symbol. And we would do this at the surface, and then we would do it again at depth. And I really like that. And I love being able to do it with divers, because a lot of times as we're descending in that column, we have some anxieties about, hey, where is the bottom? Where am I at? Am I at the right depth and things? But if we'll take a minute, relax, calm our minds, calm our hearts, make sure that we've got air, and find that breath that helps us be able to maintain that perfect buoyancy that we're starting to adjust. Any questions or thoughts about controlling our buoyancy?
Well, I've also noticed that whenever I'm at depth, I typically need to adjust my equipment just a little bit because now it feels a little bit too big. And whenever it's not tight enough, it seems to make me feel off balance just slightly. So that's another thing that I do whenever I get at depth. I would make sure that everything is adjusted just the way I like it, and then I'm completely comfortable before we take off and start diving. And hopefully the dive master lets us do that, lets us have that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, because as we're descending, if we're wearing a wetsuit, that wetsuit's compressing against us and our shoulder straps or our stomach waistband, that cummerbund, it changes because everything that we have is compressed just a little bit. So if we take a few seconds to snug everything up, make sure that we don't have any little danglies hanging below us, it will help maintain that buoyancy as well. Benjamin, any other thoughts on or questions about maintaining our buoyancy as we're descending or once we get to the bottom?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Our next slide, developing proper breathing patterns. So we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to read this slide. It says, use a balanced, high-quality regulator. Benjamin, what do you think that means, or what's your experience in using either your own regulators or a rental regulator when you've been out diving?
Well, we just recently did that side-by-side comparison in side mount between the Apex XTX 50 and a Hollis 200LX, and it was impressive to find how much easier and more efficient the air was from the Hollis 200LX. They're both well serviced and good quality regulators, but we found out side by side that the Hollis 200LX reduced my my gas consumption by about 1.5 liters a minute. So it was definitely interesting to see how that worked out and went through the process. And then obviously using the cheaper regulators from the shop that are rental regulators increases our sac rate because they're more difficult to breathe with. The work of breathing is more difficult because of the dynamic of it, and because it's not as well balanced as some of the high end regulators.
Absolutely. So my first dive in Yellowstone Lake, I had rented a regulator from our local shop. Benjamin and I jumped into the water and I hit 100 feet. We did our okay checks. Everything was okay. I looked at my gauge and I noticed that my air consumption was quickly decreasing faster than it should have. I recognized that I had a free flowing regulator, kept it in my mouth, couldn't signal to Benjamin. We had another dive buddy with us, but I ended my dive. I was done. That's one of the reasons why Benjamin and I really like having our own gear and our own regulators, is that we have the opportunity to be able to make sure that we've got a regulator that's balanced and appropriate for the conditions that we're diving in. Make sure that they're cold water rated, where we're diving a lot in cold water. Having our own gear and our own regulator and knowing how that venturi valve and things adjust accordingly is important. It's going to help us have a safer, more comfortable dive. That's one of the things that we can consider investing in, is that regulator at the proper time. Okay, so using a quality balanced regulator is key. Making sure that it's serviced regularly too, right? About once a year, we'll take it into the shop. They'll go through it, make sure everything is tuned accordingly. So we're making sure that we're getting enough air into our lungs so we can continue to have those great diving experiences. So the second bullet point on here, breathe slow and deeply in that rhythmic pattern. So that's where we talked about earlier, that I like to take a count of 4, make sure that my lungs are inflated, that I'm breathing from the bottom of my lungs, not from the top. If I can do that nice rhythmic belly breathing like we do in yoga, or if we're watching a baby breathing, it will help us be able to get that buoyancy that we're needing. And then, maybe hold for a count of 2 as I'm ascending over a rock or a coral head, or hovering to kind of take a look at that crab or something in the hole, and then exhaling for that count of 4 too. And then the last bullet point on here, to relax and to maintain that streamlined position. So Janine, you talked about earlier, even within our dive, after we've made that initial descent, that we're constantly kind of adjusting that equipment, right? whether it be that we're adjusting our inflation within our BC, or we're tugging on our straps, making sure that we've got things tucked in. If we continue to do that throughout our dive, that will just help us keep dialed into position. Any other experience you want to share about being able to maintain that buoyancy position, or maybe some questions that you've had during dives as to how to keep things properly adjusted?
No, you're doing a great job covering this.
Thank you. All right, any last questions on proper breathing patterns? Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next piece of our slide, the effects of our breathing. So we talked a little bit about as we're breathing and we're paying attention to that rhythmic breathing, that we should be rising a little bit in the water column. So even though we've done that weight check on the surface, we've got our BC inflated, as we're breathing, that's one of the things that we're going to experience. We're going to rise a little bit in the column as we take that breath, and then we're going to descend as we exhale that breath as well. Key part, right? Number one rule of SCUBA is we're always breathing. So we're not holding that breath and just holding that breath. And then we're going to adjust that BC volume as necessary. Keeping in mind that as we're ascending, and it doesn't take a lot, that air is going to expand in our BC, and we're going to want to make sure that we're letting air out as we're coming up in the water column and ending our dive and coming up to that point where we're doing our safety stop. Any questions about the effects of our breathing? When you've been experienced with maybe a time when you weren't controlling or aware of your breathing and how it affected your dive?
Oh,
well, whenever I'm taking photos underwater, I find that if I continue to breathe normally, some of my photos are out of focus. And so you said that we should never hold our breath to stay neutral, but I've kind of found that I have to for a moment, for that split moment when I click that shutter, the moment between whenever I focus and then I click that shutter button. Is that okay?
Absolutely. So similar to like on the surface, right? As photographers, getting that perfect shot, a lot of people will use a tripod. A lot of times they'll use that extra trigger wire to making sure that their body and that vibration that we have isn't distorting that image, right? That's what kind of causes that. So it is, we're finding that, perfect nudibranch, or, maybe it's the sea turtle that we've got lined up just perfectly with the person that we're diving with, or whatever it is. It's certainly going to be okay if we take that breath, find that focus point, click our shutter, make sure that we get that perfect shot, and then make sure that we're continuing to breathe naturally after that. We just don't want to inhale and then come up and cause a problem with our lungs, right? Like we talked about in the open water class, that if you need to, we can always go back and do a refresher, talk about some of those dive maladies that can happen if we're holding our breath and ascending too quickly within that water column. But like I said, that 2 to 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever it is, isn't going to, make a huge difference. We just want to be mindful of our breath as we're down and we're taking photos, or we're checking out the fish and the coral life that we're around.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts or questions about the effects of our breathing? All right. So this is our last slide, the summary. So we've talked a little bit about controlling our descent rate as we reach that target depth, right? As we're descending in that water column, we're going to add little puffs of air to our BC as we need to until we get to that target depth of our dive. We've talked about that proper weighting. We've talked about doing a little bit of a buoyancy, or doing a buoyancy check at the surface, making sure that we're properly weighted so that as we're breathing, we can control that buoyancy that we have. We've talked about staying in diving position and being able to control our breathing and not, affecting the environment around us. And then we want to be mindful that we're not overweighting ourselves. As we're overweighting ourselves, we're causing our buoyancy, our lungs, to work harder to be able to maintain that buoyancy, or we're adding a lot of air to our BC and possibly shortening our dive because of it. So in the beginning, we said our objectives today were to describe the proper adjustment procedures to streamline our equipment. We talked about how we'd be able to list proper procedures for buoyancy control. And then our third objective was to identify and correct our buoyancy problems. So we've talked about all of that with the slides that we've covered today. Any other final thoughts or questions?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. So 16. I came up with a 45. And I'm prepared to defend that decision.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and do the debriefing with Nikki, if you don't mind.
But you muted yourself.
I hate that when I move my mic, it mutes it. I'm going to go ahead and share the evaluation here. Let's see. So here's the evaluation form that we're currently using. That we all, and just be aware, minimum scores for an AI and instructor and an instructor evaluation is 36 points. AIT is 45, and for an IT instructor trainer seminar is 50. So starting with each section, there's a minimum of 5 points in each section unless it is in a gray area. A gray area is an automatic fail, which means it's an overall fail. I didn't have any fails in any section, so it was a pass. I gave it a passing score of 45. Section 1 was define measurable terms. Absolutely. It was very clear, straight from the slide presentation. Added the value of the topic to you, and I think that's an important thing of why do I care? And you and I both know, for me at least, whenever I'm listening to a presentation, if the speaker can't give me a reason why I should care, or I can't find a value in it for me, then I generally tune out. And I think I'm probably fairly common on that as well. And then provide an overview with main points outlined. I think that was a little light, but it was sufficient to give a score there as well. So I gave a 3 on that one as well. Definitely, we want to dig a little deeper into, I think sometimes with the main points of, we're going to talk about, describe the proper adjustment procedures for a streamline. We're going to go through and talk about the BC. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about that. But this is an entry-level class of perfect buoyancy. So for this point, I think it was sufficient to maximize the score on that. But if it was a more advanced class, I think being prepared to step into that a little bit more deeply would be to your advantage. Section 2, knowledge and skills of applicable. I mean, it's obvious you dive a lot, and you've got an amazing dive buddy. So it's very clear on that you're probably better than your dive buddy by far. So I gave you a knowledge and practical application. Equipment sales, I gave you a 2 on that. I think when it comes to selling, right product for right audience at right time, I think there was a better opportunity for you to talk about buoyancy compensators. We're talking about perfect buoyancy, and really in the beginning mind, the buoyancy compensator is probably a better fit in this particular subject. and easier to explain because it is the thing that causes you to simply float or create trim. So I think there was and while there was equipment sales opportunity for that, there could have been a little bit more direct on that and a little bit more right place, right time idea. So I would have hit buoyancy compensator or over regulators, and I'd have brought that a little bit deeper sooner into the process around the time of float. So I gave you a 2 on that one. Let's see. Delivered environmentally and safe diving practices. Absolutely, don't want to crash into things that are fragile. That's a simple one, especially in buoyancy in buoyancy. So I think that's a perfect time for that. Section 3. Let's see. Safe and accurate information on the topic. I think there was one concern of holding breath. We're talking with entry-level students, and as you know from my class when I teach emergency buoyant ascent, we always start off the class with Benjamin's going to turn my air back on, just so I know that they hear that, they feel it, and I make them actually say it through the process. You and I both know that when I tell them in the emergency buoyant ascent that I'm going to turn their air off at any point, their little brains turn off and they don't hear anything past air is going off. And so with a beginning student, I think talking about anything holding your breath is definitely very concerning and very, very, very scary, especially when we're really focusing on that always breathe, always breathe, always breathe. And certainly brought it back to subject and topic, and clarified just short breaths, short periods of time, or when you're utilizing a camera, short periods to stabilize yourself out. But is this really the time to bring that subject in? It would concern me a little bit. You making sure that the students heard always breathe, always breathe, always breathe should be the message at a buoyancy control as they get low, farther down the funnel of being divers and strong divers. I think that's a more apropos topic that you can discuss. But I think at this point, anytime you say hold your breath, is at least at this game, because these divers are going to have 10 dives or less. With the Van Boevens is a good example. I would never tell them hold your breath. I don't think that they're ready for that message. So I think we need to be concerned about that. Let's see. Completing informational logical sequence, fantastic. You follow the slides, and that's the easiest way to do it. As you've seen with our newer dive masters, giving them subjects, they definitely want to get excited. They want to move past. You did a really good job, but just follow the slides, stay on topic, and follow the slides. A delivered environment is safe diving practices, where I talked about that again. I gave you a good score on that. Perfect. Effective use of training aids. You use the slides. That's the easiest way to do that. Definitely another thing I think that a lot of us, and I don't do nearly as often, and I think you've seen this in my presentations for open water. I've started doing screen grabs of the My SSI app, and I think this is a really great time to get them to open up the app and start looking at their dive log. Are you adding information? But again, a perfect score, just a note of an opportunity to make sure, hey, do you have the My SI app open? Do you have it downloaded? Are you using it? How are you using it? Let's see that and getting into that. Motivated the class participation. I counted 12 questions, and I counted 50-50 of direct questions versus general questions. And you and I both know, especially in working with guys, that you have to ask them a direct question. Benjamin, what do you think about this? And then be quiet and make them answer. Because we've seen that situation where we've asked a diver, are you okay? And he was clearly not okay, paddling like freaking Mark Spitz or Michael Phelps, trying to keep down because his buoyancy was completely screwed. And yeah, I'm okay. So guys, you have to ask direct questions to and utilize their name, because guys aren't nearly as smart as girls. Like I said, I counted 50-50. 6 questions that were direct, 6 questions that were general. That was fantastic. Ask questions to evaluate students' knowledge. You absolutely do that. I counted 4 direct questions overall to get through that portion as well. When we got into section, the summary section here is where we got a little bit concerned is that the value was not restated. So I had to give you a 0 on that. And the objectives were not restated, but I gave you a 3 because you did restate the main points. I got it misplaced on my section. So I could only give you 3 points on the summary section. And then finally, accomplished objectives. Absolutely. 7 days a week, twice on Sunday. Accurate terminology, impression, speaking mannerisms, ability. You're fantastic. I think you're a great instructor, and you relate to the students very easily. And effective use of time, I gave you a 2. We went to 25 minutes, and the goal was 15 to 17 minutes. So definitely over, which is tough, especially newer presentations. Going through it and being very detailed is great. It was a big subject and a lot to cover. So but I gave you a 2 there. So overall, good presentation. Janine,
I
how did I do?
agree. That was an easy pass for you, Nikki. I love your teaching style. You are approachable. You don't stand up there and act like you know it all, and don't intimidate people. And the questions that you ask of people are within their level of answering. You're not asking them you didn't pull in Boyle's law and start asking them, how do we calculate the pressure times volume? I mean, you didn't make it too difficult. And I always appreciate that of instructors. I mean, I would definitely take a class from you.
Well, thank you.
Because you made it fun. All of your examples were relevant. I agreed with some of the little areas where Benjamin said that that he would have liked to see you do things just a little bit differently, but I could give a presentation right now, and I could miss some things, and I know the ins and outs of making presentations. Lots of times I'll put things on paper, and then my mouth is talking faster than my brain, and I just I accidentally forget about that. So I loved that presentation, and I do appreciate that you doing this for us. And Benjamin, you and I will go over your scoring together, and the areas that I differed, and just the ways that I handled the debriefing just a little bit differently. Not that my way is right, but that to give you a different viewpoint on it is all.
Sure.
So, okay, what is the next topic?
Do you want to do that now while it's fresh for that one, or are you saving both of them till the end?
Well, here's my issue is that I have to be at my daughter's house in 38 minutes, really, because she has to leave. She's closing on a new house today. She's a real estate agent, and so somebody has to be at her house to meet the movers. And so for me, it's just a little bit of a time issue, and I don't want to not allow you to do a presentation that you've worked so hard to prepare, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
So
second topic comes from SCUBA and talking about the buoyancy system.
Okay. Okay.
Benjamin, are you starting and introducing, or
Go
assuming
ahead.
more things from before? Okay.
Same exact as prior.
So I will caveat this, that this normally, and with our shop, we typically would do this adjacent to the pool as we're doing a SCUBA experience. And I would have a buoyancy compensator with me to be able to talk and point out all the different parts. I apologize because I do not have one here.
No, but I am going to note that one of your training aids is a buoyancy compensator. So you get credit.
Thank you. All right, so I'm really excited today because I get to share with you both one of my favorite things that I have in my life. I love being able to be in the water, under the water, and be able to breathe. It's a very different and unique system or experience that we have. So today we're going to talk about our buoyancy compensator, or the buoyancy system. So the value to us is that as we're underwater, we need a way to be able to control where we're at within the water, and be able to control not just sitting on the bottom, but where we are on the surface, and having a way to protect ourselves on the surface that will act like a life jacket. So we're going to talk about parts of the buoyancy system. We're going to talk about how to use our buoyancy compensator, and then we're going to talk about ways that we can inflate it on the surface as well, or underwater too. All right, so what is our buoyancy system? We have this like jacket type thing that we're putting on, right? It's got a clip at our waist. We've got adjustable straps at our shoulders. We've got this tube that comes off of our left-hand side, and it's got a couple buttons on it. That's our buoyancy compensator. It's what's going to act as our life jacket on the surface. We're going to want to make sure that it's inflated anytime that we're on the surface. That air is going to keep us buoyant and keep us up on the surface. But the other part to our buoyancy compensator are either pockets to be able to add weight to, or a weight belt of some sort to be able to add weight. A lot of times, if we were just relying upon the gear that we have on, we might not have enough weight to be able to descend. So there's two crucial pieces to our buoyancy system. One's that buoyancy compensator, and then the other is the weight system that goes with it. That's going to allow us to be able to get down, to be able to find that position that we want to be in as we're checking out the bottom of the pool today, and eventually as we're moving into our open water class and future open water dives. So we talked about how, let's talk a little bit about how we're going to put air into our buoyancy compensator and how we're going to let air out. That's pretty key in being able to experience the scuba area. All right, so we've got this tube that I talked about coming off of our left-hand side. There's two buttons on it. Have either of you tried to play with those two buttons and see what they do?
I have, but nothing happened.
Okay, probably the one on the top, maybe. Or we got to make sure that our air is turned on, right? That's key number one. We got to make sure that we've got air coming into the system. Somebody else has set up all of the gear for you today. So that's kind of key number one, checking that air. And that's a good way at the surface to be able to say, hey, is everything working right? So that button on the side is our inflator button. It's going to act a little bit like an elevator. We don't want to use it that way. But that's kind of how it works. If we push it, it's going to force air into our buoyancy compensator, and it's going to allow us to be able to rise. The one on the end, as we push it, it's going to let air out and allow us to descend. Benjamin, why do you think it would be important that we're not using that one on the side as our elevator button and just inflating when we're down at the bottom of the pool?
Gosh, I don't know. Seems like if you had a bunch of air, you'd go right to the surface. That seems like that might be easy if I was scared.
It could. However, there are some things that happen. One, we want to make sure that we're always breathing, right? We talked a little bit about that earlier. So being able to push that button and just come up might cause us to, maybe we're a little bit panicked, right? So we might be holding our breath. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're breathing as we carefully put air into it, and as we're controlling our way to the surface, it's probably a little bit better, especially in the pool, to use our fins and kick. Make sure that we're always breathing out. Does that help understand why we don't want to use it as an elevator button, Benjamin?
Well, is there something about that the bends, if we use it too fast, could that be a problem?
Could be. I wasn't going to talk about that with a fresh group of SCUBA students, but yes, there are things that could happen to us if we're using it as an elevator button. One, we could have a buildup of nitrogen in our body and get the bends. I don't think that's going to happen just with our 1 hour session in the pool. But we could be, like I said, holding our breath. And as we're holding our breath and coming up, that could cause us to overexpand our lungs. And we don't want that to happen today either. Okay, so we talked about letting air out. We talked about putting air in. Once we get down to the bottom today, we want to try to find a neutral position. Janine, what do you think it means to be neutral in the ends once we're in the water?
To not feel the need to not, so that our bodies don't feel like we're sinking or floating.
Absolutely. That's perfect. We want to make sure that we're just kind of floating, and it's kind of a weird feeling. It's like we're being an astronaut today. I love it. So if we feel really heavy, because we're going to put some weight on us to make sure that we can descend today, we're going to put just small puffs of air, only a couple, just a couple small puffs. We're not going to hold down the inflator button or anything, just a couple of puffs of air. So when we get to the bottom of the pool today, we want to just be able to rise. It's important as we're doing this, we're also thinking about our lungs, because as we breathe in, we're going to rise just a little bit. So you'll notice that if we don't have too much air in our BC, that we're going to be able to then breathe out, and we're going to descend maybe to the bottom of the pool. So as you move into your open water class, that's one of the key pieces that you can have as a buoyancy compensator. And there's lots of different styles out there. There's ones with back plates and wings, with adjustable harnesses and things. There's ones that are more of a vest style that wrap around you. As you meet with a dive professional or the dive shop, they can be able to help you select the right one for what you're doing. I find that the value to me is that if I have my own buoyancy compensator, I know where my weights are at. I know how to ditch them. That's important. You'll talk more about that within your open water class and things. Then it gives me better comfort within the water, and I can pay more attention to the fish and the corals and the rocks or whatever it is that I'm going to dive into sea. So last part, on the surface, there's a couple different ways that we can inflate our BC. So that button on the end, we talked about how we could push it in, it lets all the air out, and we're going to descend. If we're sitting on the surface and we don't have any air left and we can't use that power inflator, we can push that button in on the end, we can blow in the mouthpiece, and it's going to inflate that the buoyancy compensator as well. Or, like I said, if we've got air left and we're sitting at the surface, we can push that inflator button, and it's going to allow us to be able to inflate that jacket, and we're going to sit on the surface. So there's a few things. I don't know if you've looked at the buoyancy compensator, but there's a bunch of different places that have some kind of round valves on them, and there's like a string to them, right? So there's a lot of different ways that we can let air out of our buoyancy compensator. One, we talked about the button on the end of our inflator. If we pull that hose, a lot of times it also acts as a dump valve. It's right here at our shoulder. It will allow air out of it. I've also got a string on my right-hand side that if I pull it, there's another valve at my shoulder that I can let air out. And then once again, there's one on my left, I think, hip that I can pull, and it also lets air out. So the use of those is going to depend upon how we're sitting in the water column. If I'm pretty vertical, the one at my shoulder is a good option because I will let air out. If I'm laying in diver position and I'm horizontal in the water, that one probably isn't going to work very well because of where the air is sitting at my BC. So that one at my hip might work better. So as we're sitting on the surface and we've put our gear together today, we want to make sure that each one of those are working properly. We can inflate our BC, tug on each one of the strings, make sure that they're working. And then under the water, we can play around with them. And then once we kind of get properly weighted on the bottom of the pool, you can play around with it and see what it does to be able to help control your buoyancy. So today we talked about our buoyancy compensator system. We talked about having a BC. I gave you some of the reasons why I like having my own. It gives me a little bit of a greater comfort in the water. We talked about how we're inflating it. We talked about a weight system and why that's part of our buoyancy system as well. We talked about different ways that we can inflate our BC. We talked about making sure that we're properly finding that neutral position a little bit, and then some of the reasons why we don't want to use that inflator to come up too quickly. Any questions?
No. Benjamin, what time did you have her starting at? I'm sorry.
I had 7:23 and it shows 7:33 is ending. So 11 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki.
You're welcome.
Another easy pass for you, sweetheart. Definitely good job on that. Starting from the beginning, effective. Define the objective in measurable terms. Uh, explain the value of the topic and provide overview of the main topic outlined. I think the challenge is defining objectives in measurable terms in this one. I scored you down to a 2 on that one and a 2 on the value as well. Again, we're talking to very basic students, so I think being a little more generous on that one's easy because they're at this point the boys are punching each other, the girls are looking at each other's swimsuits, and they're very low. They just want to get in the water. They just want to blow bubbles, and they want to see each other blowing bubbles, and they want to do flips. I never understood the flips, but that's what they want to do. So there's a very low litmus on that, but making sure to, guys, at the end of this, you're going to be able to utilize this BC to float on the surface for safety. You're going to be able to do this as well. And the value to this is this, by being able to do this, you won't drown, whatever it is, a little facetious there, but a little serious too. Sometimes with the boys who are not heads usually because they're 16 and don't understand things, I like to use very clear terms. This will keep you safe. So you are not going to die. If I have to really nod it out to them as well. So I hit you 2 points, 2 points, and 3 points in that section. I haven't added all these up yet. Knowledge of the subject, obvious is easy. The only thing I didn't catch is how do we get them back out of this and retail therapy them on this and promote a continuous safe diving message on this. So how do we get them back? And so one of the things about the SCUBA skills or Discover SCUBA programs is their acquisition programs. We want to see them continue the process from trying this to doing an open water course with us to buying gear to becoming a lifelong customer. So it's an acquisition program. And so the more we can focus on, hey, have you thought about buying your own mask, snorkel, and fins? Right now you're using this rental stuff. It's fantastic. And snorkeling is a lot of fun. This is great, some equipment, certainly I don't think this would be an appropriate place you should buy your own BC rig and a reg set and wetsuit right out the gate and a new dive computer. In fact, let's get you in a Shearwater while at it. That's kind of definitely overkill, but definitely a good opportunity to talk to them. Hey, a good quality mask in this makes a huge difference. It's very much the difference between driving that old beater that your dad gave you, that 87 Honda Civic, to driving your dad's Escalade, right? So, little things like you can throw in there. And then I really love diving, being above and beyond the surface. Here's where I like to go. We really like going to Roatan. We really loved our time in Hawaii. And this is where we can, have you guys traveled with your families? And where did you guys go where there was water? Would it have been neat for you to discover that? Our dive shop offers trips like that too. So there's a couple opportunities for retail therapy in there. And I think it's definitely important to, realize this is an acquisition program, not just a cool, fun school program for them as well. Safe, accurate information, always good. Completed information logical sequence, fantastic. Deliver an environmental safe practice message. I didn't really hear too much about, hey, we definitely want to make sure we're being part of the community. We're being safe, but we're utilizing, we don't utilize safe single-use containers, or while we're out there, we're picking trash up. So I scored you fairly low on that one because I think that's a really good opportunity to introduce an environmental message with kids. What was that?
Okay. Sorry, it's my daughter. Where are you?
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I get it. I was just coming through my speakers. Like, what am I beeping at? So I think it's a good time to hit them up. At Owen's age, it's perfect time to start talking about environmental messages as well. Use of training aids. You had a BC. That was fantastic. Motivated the class of participation. I counted 5 direct questions to make sure that they and indirect questions, and ask questions to evaluate knowledge. Again, great. Restated the main points, objectives. I still didn't hear a very strong value statement in there for them. So I scored you a 2 on that one. And then accomplished objectives, absolutely. Accurate terminology and effective use of time. I scored you perfect on all 3 of those. So overall, I think there's 54 points total on this. I marked you 1, 2, let's see, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I took 11 points off total out of the 54, so 43. So I a little lower than the last one because I think I gave you a 45 on the first one. Yeah, gave you 45 on the first one. Overall, I mean it's definitely there. You're far better instructor than I am by far. So
Thank you, Nikki. I
welcome.
cannot tell you how much I appreciate you doing this for us. Nobody enjoys creating presentations, but hopefully you can use these when you're teaching Scuba and perfect buoyancy anyway. So hopefully it wasn't a waste of your time, you know. But like I said, I love your teaching style. And as I'm sure your students do as well. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So
Thank you.
if I put a pause on this and I take my computer to my daughter's house, can we pick back up in probably 20 minutes by the time I get there and get things set up? Is that possible in StreamYard?
it's not. I just use the same link. We'll go back in the same link. I won't be able to continue recording it, but that's okay.
Okay.
What I'll do is I'll send you a new stream link
Yeah.
here just in a moment, and we'll record that one.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So
And thank
Benjamin,
you.